All right, so I'm going to take a run through the water conditions report as usual. So looking back at the month of August, you can see right here it was just below average rainfall. So that represents 3 months in a row of below average rainfall. Of course, the system is still recovering from some of those excessive rains that we saw back during the month of May. So in total, the month of August was about only 79% of average rainfall, or a little less than 1.7 inches below average. The majority of that rain were over here on the lower East Coast down in Miami-Dade counties, and of course on the southwest coast over here. Looking at the wet season to date, however, we're still just slightly above average, roughly 119% of average rainfall and in excess of just over close to 5.5 inches of rain. Again, the majority of those rains were along the coastal areas as well as some up in the upper Kissimmee Valley. So looking at the lakes in the upper Kissimmee, starting at East Lake Toho, you can see from those rains back during the end of July, beginning of August, there was a slight increase in the stage on East Lake Toho, and then we brought it back down to schedule and increased some of those releases. And now we're at that time of the year where the schedule is starting to rise up here, so we're going to be following the schedule up to the top of its winter pool up here. Similar situation for Lake Toho, schedule starting to rise, and we'll be following that line up to the winter pool there. Looking at Lake Kissimmee, however, we had increased flows, or actually maintained some flows around the 4,000 CFS coming down out of S65 going down the Kissimmee River in anticipation of the tropical storm that spun up over Labor Day weekend that I'll talk about a little bit more later on. But we've since curtailed a lot of those flows, and we've reduced the flow coming down Kissimmee River from S65 to the tune of about 1,500 CFS as of this morning. So that's the amount of flow, and Terry will probably talk about it a little bit more, that's needed for the health of the river and keeping water out on the floodplain. So we're managing the river. We're also being cognizant of some of the downstream conditions in Lake Okeechobee and trying to hold some water up there in the upper chain using Lake Kissimmee, Cypress, and Hatchinahaw as that buffer. Again, this time of year, the schedule is starting to rise up here to its winter pool. So we'll be following that line up as we go over the next several weeks. So looking at Lake Okeechobee, as of this morning, lake level is roughly at 14.7. It's come up close to 1/4 of a foot in the last 30 days, but over the last 7 days or the last week, it's been relatively flat, only 0.05 of a foot of stage increase over that period of time. The Corps of Engineers is currently making releases both to the east and west coast. To the east coast at 1,170 cubic feet per second is measured at S80, and to the west coast of 3,000 CFS measured at S79. So again, just where it falls for this time of year, we're looking at this red trace here. It kind of gets confusing as they all start coming together this time of year when you get to the peak of the wet season and the peak of hurricane season. That's generally how Lake Okeechobee stacks up in relation to some of the previous years. So looking at the water conservation areas, you can start up here in the upper right-hand corner. Conservation Area 1 is below its regulation schedule, and again, it'll continue to rise up through this area as it starts moving through the rest of the wet season. Area 2 is above its regulation schedule, which is this line here on the graphic. However, if you recall, the Corps of Engineers approved and implemented a deviation for Area 2 earlier this year, so we're just slightly below that deviation line. As a result of that, the S11s are currently open, moving about 1,500 CFS from Area 2 down into Area 3. So that takes us to Area 3 over here. You can see it had been having a nice recession until this past weekend, or Labor Day weekend actually, when the tropical storm spun up in the southern portions of the district. You can see that little stage increase, or that little blip right there, as a result of those direct rains coming from the tropical storm. So it came up again roughly 0.2 of a foot back above what's called this action line here, which requires some other operations in how the southern end of the system is treated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. So looking down at the S12s, all 4 of the S12s, A, B, C, and D, are currently open, and they're moving about 2,000 CFS out of Conservation Area 3 down into Everglades National Park. Currently, right now, the operations for the 333 structure prior to Tropical Storm Gordon, it had been moving about 750 CFS out of Area 3 into the L29 and into Northeast Shark River Slough. However, in anticipation of and following Tropical Storm Gordon, we had to curtail those discharges, and we actually closed the 333 structure for a period of time to account for some of that direct rainfall in this area and allow the L29 to recover some. We had opened it up briefly earlier this week and late last week. As of this morning, the 333 structure is currently closed at the direction of the Corps of Engineers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to Tropical Storm Gordon. So looking at the South Dade conveyance system, this is the area that received the majority of those rains from Tropical Storm Gordon. So we spent most of last week recovering water levels along the C111 and L31 North Canal. Currently, all those levels have recovered with the exception of one small area right here in the 8.5 square mile area. There are portions of the 8.5 square mile area that still have standing water above ground. So we're taking some aggressive actions, and some of the pump stations there, both the 357 pump station as well as the 331 pump station. Currently, we removed what is called the limit switches on those pump stations and allowed them to pump down to the bottom of their design capabilities to be more aggressive in trying to move some of that water out of the 8.5 square mile area and bring down those water levels. In combination with that aggressive pumping operations, we have also curtailed some of the inflows to the L29 canal. I already mentioned the 333 structure is closed. We had a series of temporary pumps that were located at the 355B structure. Those pumps have been turned off, have been ceased pumping as of this morning, but currently we are still pumping water and moving water through the S356 pump station, trying to again maintain flood control along the northern portions of the L31 North and move that water back into Northeast Shark River Slough. All of those operations are in consideration of the concerns and the issues in the 8.5 square mile area. So in combination with that aggressive pumping, we're hoping to see that downward trend of those water levels in the 8.5 square mile area. And once we begin to see that downward trend and moving in a positive direction, then we'll once again resume moving water into Northeast Shark River Slough through the 333 structure. From looking at some of the water levels and effects of those aggressive operations as of this morning, I'm optimistic and hopeful that we'll be able to once again resume, having trouble with that word this morning, resume moving water through 333 come Monday or Tuesday of next week. So with that, once again, I'll just remind the board of all the other operations that are currently ongoing, especially in the southern portion down here for Conservation Area 2 and 3, to be able to move water out of those conservation areas, move it through the canals along the lower East Coast and get it out to tide. We currently still have several locations where we've got temporary pumps deployed. The pumps here moving water from Area 2 into Area 1 are still in operation and moving water. A pump right here moving water from Area 3 into 3B is currently in operation. However, as I mentioned, the pumps at 355B down here at the bottom were ceased operations this morning, and we still have the low water conditions on the western side, so these pumps are not currently operating, as well as the 336 pumps are not currently operating, moving water from the L31 into the C4 canal. Again, all of those pumps that aren't operating are as a result of some of the lower water levels and being able to have enough water to be able to supply the pumps themselves. So looking at Tropical Storm Gordon, that came up over Labor Day weekend, moved across the southern portions of the district through the Florida Keys. You can see the majority of that rain fell right in here in southern Miami-Dade County. They received anywhere from 3 to 6 inches of rain during that 3-day period. Mr. Barber, Mr. Weisinger, you got spared, as the majority of the heavy rains on the southwest coast fell just offshore, although you did get up to 1.5 inches of rain throughout the Big Cypress Basin. One good news story that I'll bring to the board's attention: if you recall, a while back, the board authorized the construction of the Florida Bay project. These are some of the facilities that were constructed as a result of that project. They were in place and in operation throughout Tropical Storm Gordon. The two pump stations, S199 and S200. S200 located here, pumping water into the Frog Pond detention cells along here. If you recall, as part of that construction effort, we were going in and we were installing a brand new fourth pump into that station. They were originally constructed with 3 pumps here, but there was one additional bay that was left empty for future use. We've gone back in and installed that fourth pump, and we utilized that fourth pump during Tropical Storm Gordon to help bring down and manage some of the levels along the C-111 canal in this reach between 176 and 177. In addition, for the 332 detention basin, which is this area here, so the 332D pump station located up here pumps down and through the detention cells. So that was in use during Tropical Storm Gordon. At this location previously had been just an open gap for the free exchange of water under once the water levels came up in the detention cells, to be able to move out into Everglades National Park. As part of the construction project, we came in and closed that gap, constructed a weir along that reach. And this is just a picture of that weir with water flowing over top of the weir from east to west. So from the detention cells towards the L31 West Canal and into Everglades National Park back here in the background. So looking ahead, the forecast still continues to call for above average rainfall for the beginning portions of the dry season through February of next year. So obviously we'll keep an eye on that as we head into the dry season, coming off the peak of hurricane season right now, and what rainfall we can reasonably expect to see throughout the next several months. So I guess I'll just finish up with a look at the tropics. It's a little busy out there. Of course, everybody knows about Hurricane Florence right here that'll be coming on shore in the next 24 hours. The one we're watching is Isaac down here. Its forecast is continue due west along this trajectory, and sometime Monday it's looking to take a little bit of a turn back up to the northwest, and we'll be watching that turn and whether or not that turn takes it through here out this way into the Gulf of Mexico, or whether or not that turn brings it up a little bit closer, coming over top of Cuba and up the west coast of Florida. So that'll be something we'll watch throughout the weekend and into the beginning portions of next week. Either way, right now the forecast for Tuesday of next week is for heavy rainfall in the southern portions of the system, so Broward, Miami-Dade, Collier counties. You can expect some increased rainfall on the order of 1.5 to 2 inches early portions of next week.